today's a landmark day, but on Tuesday, I think it was Tuesday, the central bank released its regulatory sandbox regime, which is designed to test the potential benefits that fintech companies may be able to bring to Barbados, the economy, its citizens, its companies, institutions. And it's a landmark day today because that process is going to be inaugurated by BIT. And we're really proud to be the first company, a Barbadian company, that does that. We specialize in payment solutions that we aim to use to drive social inclusion, financial empowerment, and also promote economic growth. It's not a easy sandbox, it's pretty robust. The company is going to be putting itself under what I consider to be unprecedented scrutiny, especially for any company that I know about in financial services in Barbados.
Which is actually to science. Because we only invent what we can imagine. We don't invent things we can't imagine. So it probably was Star Trek's communicator which led to the mobile phone. And Star Trek's iPads in the 1970s, people would read off these things. So what we can imagine, we invent. And that's why we want to create a society and economy that can imagine. Are not afraid to imagine. And are not, don't have that imagination pulled back from them with the despair that even if they imagined it, they could never do it in Barbados. And so that's the kind of society that the Prime Minister and this government is trying to create. When the Prime Minister threw down that mandate on September the 18th to the Governor, myself, and the Deputy Governor, Michelle, and Kester, that we will have a regulatory sandbox. I wonder if you'd asked a bookie, what are the odds that this would happen in 5 weeks? Those bookies would have lost money on that trade, I'm sure. And that was largely because, I have to say, that was, I think, incomprehensible from the old Barbados, highly unlikely in the old Barbados. And we need to create a new Barbados where that is the norm, where that is expected, and where that is easy. And it was made possible this time around, in large part, because of Rawdon Adams, who played a very constructive role. We were all, I think, courteous and civil and firm, and we pushed each other. We pushed each other with some civility, but we pushed each other. And BIT and the regulators, I think, came up with a better sandbox because of the very constructive discussions we had. So I really want to thank Rawdon. And I also want to say that, if you want to move the center of gravity of a country or regulations, you have to move the outer edges too. The outer edges is what leads to the center of gravity moving. And so I also want to thank the founders of BIT, who have been on the outer edges and have been pushing and pushing, and that's helped to move the center of gravity. We don't always see eye to eye, we don't always speak the same language, but we certainly listen and allow ourselves to be pushed on occasion, and I think that has played a very important role. So I thank the founders of BIT. We have sometimes heated discussions, but we listen to each other and they're constructive. And I hope you feel when you see the regulatory sandbox, so we have listened and we are moving. And I also want to thank my colleagues in the regulatory bodies because they have been pushed too, and we appoint regulators to be people who are highly professional, who are highly prudential, and take their mandate of protecting Barbadians very seriously. So when we tell them to do something that's never been done before, they are naturally cautious and conservative, and they should be. So I think you should thank them for having taken a step which it would have been much easier for them not to have taken. It would not have been a good step for Barbados. It would not have been a good thing for Barbados if they had not taken that step, but it would have been easy for them not to take that step, and they have taken that step, so we must congratulate them. I also want to say that when we think about a regulatory sandbox, some people talk about this dichotomy, this tension between innovation and protection. We don't believe, actually, we believe that's a false divide, that you can do both. And the way you do both is by being very true to the principles of why we regulate. what is the public duty in regulation? And as you know, finance is very special. It's a bit like health and education. We license health operators and education operators, and we license financial operators. And we license them because, you know, when you buy an apple or a mango, if you don't like it, you don't go back to that vendor. When you buy a life insurance policy, you can't go back when you're retired. You can't go back when your loved one has passed away and there's the life insurance policy. So we've got to protect consumers. And of course, banks are not like any other company. Banks lend to banks. The assets of banks are the liabilities of other banks. And so the system is uniquely systemic and fragile. And that's why we regulate. Avoid systemic risk, avoid consumers losing money from a lifelong product. And so we think that as long as you hold true to those principles, there are acres of space for innovation around that. Almost every financial innovation I've seen in a generation of financial innovation can be repackaged so that consumers are protected and that the systemic risk is minimized. So I encourage, we stand today and we encourage all of our entrepreneurs and our innovators to not look at regulation as the enemy, but look at regulation as a way of adjusting what you're thinking about, that you can try it out in a way that doesn't risk consumers and doesn't risk the system. And the sandbox, and let me end with a few words on the sandbox. I think of the sandbox as giving regulators another instrument. Previously, regulators could tell you yes or no. And therefore, if you came with something brand new that had never been tried before, never tested, you can imagine what their inclination is. Now they can say, maybe. Let me test it out. Let me try it out. In a box which limits the possibility, whilst it's being tested out, of any consumers being at risk and the system being at risk. So in the case of mMoney, for example, one of the big risks would be that if people who have cash on their wallets, that cash is not somewhere else. And so we've required in the sandbox BIT to have 101% reserve of all cash that's in the wallets. There must be a reserve of 101%. That's an example of how the sandbox makes sure we can do a live experiment without having any consumers being at risk. And so people can apply to a sandbox, and there will be a panel that will determine whether the thing being tested is appropriate for a sandbox, which is really, and the governor played a very important role in defining this eligibility. Is there some new technology that makes this hard to define what is being tested? And is there some new technology which, if it fails, will actually give consumers a risk? So that's what's eligible. We test it very clearly for consumer protection, systemic risks, and then we write a report afterwards. And we limit ourselves on how long it could take for that report. And that report must be written and determine what is the future forward. Is there something that can be licensed today? Is there something that needs new licensing agreements, and what will happen before? And is there something that we don't need to regulate? So let me end there by saying that this allows us, I think, to fast-track innovation that will bring benefits to consumers in a safe way, that it protects our consumers and protects our system. Thank you.
Before we go, Minister Ankari, from single market and single economy, say that we are definitely interested in being able to facilitate better interregional payments, particularly for trade. One of the things we're very conscious of is that we use a lot of hard currency within the region to set off how best we can deal with the net difference is something that we want to be able to look at. But I am happy that as we speak to, we have agreed with the Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank to look at the potential for a joint regulatory sandbox. And the truth is that because of the movement of money in and around the region, I feel, and I've said it too many times, the journalists who are here have heard me too many times, that a lot of our regulatory entities need to be genuinely regional rather than domestic. And to have a national financial services commission, a national regional, a national competition commission, when all of us are playing in the same space, trying to do the same things, doesn't make sense. And I hope that when we go to Trinidad, in December with a special meeting on the single market and single economy, that we will make progress on some regional institutions for which we are now struggling at the national level to sustain, but which regionally, if we use the model that I used when we set up the Caribbean Court of Justice, with vesting it with national jurisdiction and regional jurisdiction, will make far more sense in order for us to be able to move forward. The proof of the pudding is always in the eating. Get a mobile pocket, double click, and it starts to download. And by the time you finish asking questions, hopefully I will have my own mMoney wallet. I am partial to the letter M.
Asking how exactly it works. Can you give us a breakdown a little bit more so people, when they watch it, they'll say, okay, this is exactly how this is going to work. I want to get this, because I believe people are going to be very excited about it. So can you explain a little more exactly how the wallet is going to work?
Certainly, I think most people do have a smartphone, and I think if I was to make an analogy, it would be with something like PayPal in the US. Most people are probably familiar with that. It's very similar to PayPal. It's running payments from your smartphone in Barbados dollars. So you can go to, for example, I'll give you two typical user cases. If you are a merchant and I'm a user, and I don't know, you might sell rotis or something. I come by there, you have a tablet with the merchant version of the app. You key in the amount of the roti I'm buying, it might be $5, probably more than that. Your tablet generates a QR code, which almost looks like, is everybody familiar with what that looks like? It's just a code that another computer can scan. The user, in this case being me, would hold it up and scan, and the transaction is done. There's no change involved. For security, it's great. You don't have to walk with a lot of cash. If you lose your phone, you don't lose your money, because it's protected by, first of all, your phone will have a password, and also the application itself will have a password. So that's one application. That would be typical consumer to merchant. And in the case of the consumer, he pays no fees on that. And for the merchant, depending on, typically the highest fee he will pay is 20 cents a transaction. I think that is easily the best in the market. If he also acts as what we call a teller, someone who will, much like a Digicel or a Flow top-up merchant, someone who will take cash and transform it from paper and coins to digital, he'll enjoy a lower transaction fee, 5 cents in some cases. I don't think there's anybody who can beat that in the market. So for the merchant, the benefit is pretty clear on cost cross. Now for the consumer, not only is that transaction free, but if they want to send a payment to a friend, family, anyone, that in fact is one of our taglines, pay anyone, anywhere. That transaction peer-to-peer is free of charge. There's no charge to it. So for example, if you're separated by distance, that's very convenient. You don't have to set up a mutual rendezvous to exchange cash. And in Barbados, I think people are kind of used to driving and seeing one another, but the other place where we're active is in the Eastern Caribbean, and there it becomes much more important. 8 islands separated by 2,500 square kilometers of water. Someone in St. Lucia wants to send someone in Montserrat cash free of charge. They can use, once we're set up there, they can use the app to do that. But it's similar wherever we are regionally. So for us, the attractions are pretty clear. It's very easy to download. Prime Minister has just downloaded it in about 5 seconds. There are a couple of steps to set up that involve know your customer and anti-money laundering regulations, but they're pretty slick. It's done very quickly. It's not as though you go to a traditional financial institution, maybe you forget the photocopy of your birth certificate or whatever they're asking for nowadays. All online, easy. So the benefits are clear, and I think the process for setting up is pretty clear. The main challenge, I think, for us is just the marketing, explaining it to people, getting out, showing it to people. And I think once we crack that, people will agree with us that it's a great product.
Use that word. And they've been unbanking people. They've been unmarketing actual clients. And so when we look at BIT as regulators, we do think that financial inclusion is one of the strong benefits of this innovation, and we are hoping in that test that this will be proven. And let me say also one other thing on AML and CFT, because I know that BIT as a company and other financial fintech companies have often had trouble getting banking arrangements around the world, and also in Barbados. And I think that one of the advantages of the regulatory sandbox is if you are eligible to be in the sandbox and you're in the sandbox, it means you've passed some very tough benchmarks on anti-money laundering and counter-financial terrorism and know your customer. So that should give a lot of assurance to banks. And of course, we don't expect any banks to be involved in any discrimination of companies. So as long as the companies are applying the rules correctly, they should be able to get good banking arrangements.
I realize this is an mMoney event, so at the risk of being a heretic, could you disclose any other non-bit fintech products or apps or services or plans that might be lining up to jump into the sandbox, as it were?
Well, there are a number of various fintech things around Barbados, so you would have seen them. There's some new peer-to-peer lending things going on. And I think one of the advantages of this regulatory sandbox regime is that we can regularize some of this stuff. Some of this stuff needs to be licensed, and the regulatory sandbox will provide the opportunity to fast-track the licensing of some of the things you're seeing.
The one you mentioned is already in existence, like mMoney. Are there any that are not yet in existence that have applied, that require to be in the sandbox before they can come out into the public?
I don't know any offhand, Patrick. One of the objectives of having a regime, and the governor was very keen on this on Tuesday, was it, Governor? We published a framework. And the idea of the framework, and this is another step for Barbados, we are being transparent and predictable. So we are publishing all the details of the BIT sandbox. All of the requirements that BIT had to pass and during are going to be public. We've also published the framework for any future sandboxes. What are the basic guidelines of what any future sandbox will look for? And the purpose of that, Patrick, I think is part of your question, is to help people who are thinking about doing it where they might do it. So the more things are transparent and predictable, the more new business we will generate and attract.
And just one point there, it's a dynamic environment. So while we put this framework out, we're obviously going to learn from this first exercise. And what one envisages as we go forward is that we'll be able to modify and strengthen the framework, because I think that's going to be important, because clearly technology is going to drive much of what we do in the future. And it's going to be important, therefore, that we have the right framework to be able to accommodate these companies that want to offer financial services.
So what you can see on the CBB's website, the FSC's website today is a framework, and at the bottom it will say this may be revised. So any time you go, you'll see the up-to-date framework for all future sandboxes.
Yeah, you will forgive me if I just mention that at this point, without any new players knocking on the door, a cynic, which I'm not. But,
First paragraph, it says that this will be entirely financed by the company. So all of the costs are being borne of the sandbox are being borne by the company.
Which is the point Mr. Adams made earlier on when he said we've been regulated and we've paid for it ourselves too.
Can I just say that, you create the sandbox which drives innovation. The sandbox is created to drive and promote innovation. BIT is the first, others will follow.
And they're lined up, and that's the point I would like to make as
And for those who don't know this gentleman, this is one of the two founders, original founders of BIT, to whom Avi paid homage just now, and I'd like personally, as Prime Minister of Barbados, to pay homage to both Oliver Gale and to Gabrielle Abed, because these are global innovators of which we should be very proud. And for that, he goes against the map of the world.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Mr. CEO and Senator Adams. Thank you, Kester. This has been a long time coming, and sitting on the edge, as Professor Prasad mentioned. It's a real honor to see this progress made, and I am excited, obviously excited for BIT, but as the Prime Minister mentioned, as one of the founders of BIT, and knowing the other co-founder and knowing the entrepreneurship that we pride ourselves in and we encourage of all young Barbadians and old Barbadians alike, this is a truly exciting moment for anyone dreaming of their own business in finance or technology or otherwise. This is the maybe that we did not have the privilege of being able to access 5 years ago. And with this framework in place now, entrepreneurs can accelerate. Local entrepreneurs, regional entrepreneurs, international entrepreneurs, and businesses have a ground and a home to experiment and innovate. And I can attest to the fact that there are businesses internationally lined up and waiting for the type of environment which is now facilitated in Barbados. So this is really a momentous occasion for all business persons and aspiring dreamers, movers and shakers.
Will Uber do one of them?
Uber? Perhaps. I mean, I think
That
Uber.
the Sandbox
Well, Uber's not a financial service.
That's right.
So, but it is, but Uber is a social impact organization that takes cars off the road, reduces costs, and encourages
Uber is a
open
financial
transfer.
transaction online, so therefore, I'm wondering if that would apply, would have to go into a sandbox if it would come to.
The payment processor would, obviously, whether that's a bank or a fintech company or otherwise. But certainly the gates are open for international businesses to come into Barbados and come into the.
Can I say to you, Patrick, the one thing I've learned is that any environment that is successful or innovative, any community that is successful or innovative in the world is a very small community. When I used to manage bands, I had an interest in the people at the head of the recording industry in the world. It's a handful of people. When I was involved in education, the people who made decisions at the level of tertiary education in the world was a handful of people. When I got involved in the verified atmospheres of development finance, it's a handful of people. When I meet with the innovators in technology, it's a handful of people. When I talk to the people who are in the front line of climate change, as we're doing now, it's a handful of people. So believe you me, what we have done this morning is so significant with respect to sending the message to those innovators across the world that this is a country that is welcoming of it, and that secondly, that having two young Barbadians do this, being able to achieve capitalization from persons from North America who saw this as an amazing company, being able to have them continue to be invited globally to speak all over continuously is such an inspiration. They are the Rihannas of technology. They are the Gary Sobers of technology. And we need to be able to have other young Barbadians understand and appreciate what, as I said with Star Trek, they have gone for us in Barbados where no man has gone before. And we therefore, as a government, have a responsibility to be able to allow them to help lead the way in allowing us to meet our new imperative that our business is the world and the world is our business.
If there are no other questions, or if there's one more question, let me know.
Is the Prime Minister set up? I'll send you $5.
I'm not trying to set it on Ronald.
Oh, look at that, yeah, show me.
I just sent 25, so I can give her
Oh. And I just received the
Oh, okay.
25, but you can send your 5.
Click on receipt. I'll catch you on the way out.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for attending. Thank you very much to Governor Haynes, Professor Prasad, Prime Minister, of course, guest guy. Oliver, I second everything that was said about Oliver, maybe not the Rihanna part. Also a musician. And thank you members of the press and invited guests.
Let me also give you a sense, because there's nothing like going through this for the first time. I am fascinated. I've got level 1 approval, which basically just would require my email and password, etc. There's a daily send limit at level 1 of $500 and a monthly send limit of $500. But if I want to upgrade to level 2, I've got to put in my passport or my ID or my driver's license. And that's the kind of thing that starts then. And when we start to look at the back of it, or the fact that they will hold reserves of 101%, you begin to understand that confidence can develop fast for average people. And I want to say to older Barbadians in particular, because a lot of older Barbadians have these phones, but not sure quite how to use it. Take the time, trust me. Take the time, have your grandchildren, your children, your neighbors help you set it up, because you in particular, the older persons who walk around, you're the ones who we don't want to walk with cash. You're the ones who we want to be able to do your business without putting yourself at risk, because people may see you as easy prey. And I feel therefore that this is a kind of societal innovation that goes way beyond the purpose for which it was originally established. The purpose for which it was established was to make financial transactions easier and more affordable. The benefit for the country is safety, citizen safety, at a much higher and deeper level. So, thank you.
I'm just wondering if at the end, you know, for a lot of past the end.
Yeah.
Past the